stainless steel bowl sat untouched on the polished kitchen floor, the food inside dry and gray under the soft lights, while an old golden dog lay a few feet away, breathing shallowly, as if each breath was a decision he could still refuse. For 14 days, every brand of kibble, every vet-prescribed paste, every warmed-up gourmet meal had been pushed toward him and ignored, until the staff started whispering that maybe Rusty, the millionaire's old dog, had simply decided to give up. Specialists had come and gone, their expensive colognes and practice condolences lingering in the hallways longer than their hope, and every time they left, they repeated the same tired phrases about age, organ fatigue, and quality of life. What they didn't see was the way the house itself felt sick, how the marble floors held the echo of laughter that wasn't there anymore, how the chandeliers sparkled for no one, and how the owner of all that luxury moved like a ghost drifting from room to room. Michael Hart, widowed millionaire, stood alone in his upstairs office, his hand resting on the back of an empty leather chair as he stared at the security camera feed of Rusty lying on the kitchen tiles, the dog's graying muzzle pressed against his paws. On the screen, Rusty looked small against the vast brightness of the kitchen, the last living piece of the life Michael had shared with his late wife, and the only creature in that mansion whose suffering Michael could not force away with money. He had spent a small fortune on tests, treatments, home visits, consultations. Each charge slid easily off his credit cards, but every invoice felt like another reminder that money could not buy back the warmth that had once filled this house. Somewhere beneath the weight of his tailored shirt, his chest tightened, not in a sudden, dramatic way, but in the slow, steady ache of a man who had stopped expecting anything good to happen and was now watching the last gentle thing in his world fade out. A knock sounded on his office door, sharp and efficient, and the house manager, Mrs. Green, stepped in with a clipboard pressed to her chest, her gray bun severe enough to match the rules she kept written in her head. "Mr. Hart, the new cleaning lady is at the gate," she said, her tone smooth and detached, as if they were discussing inventory instead of a human being desperate enough to take a job in a house where no one smiled. Michael's eyes did not move from the screen where Rusty lay motionless, but his jaw flexed. He'd told Mrs. Green to hire someone new because the mansion was too big, too empty, and he hated how the dust in certain rooms made it look abandoned. "Fine," he murmured, the word catching on the dryness in his throat. "Have her fill out the paperwork. Give her the rules, the usual." Down at the front gate, Faith stood with her fingers clutched around the strap of her worn purse, watching the iron bars slide open with a groan that sounded almost reluctant, as if the mansion itself didn't really want her there. Her clothes were clean but simple, the kind people forgot as soon as they looked away. A faded blue blouse buttoned up to her throat, black pants a size too big, and shoes that had walked through more small apartments and cheap motels than any marble foyer. She had cleaned houses all her life, but never one like this. The Hart estate rose at the end of the winding drive like a modern castle. Glass, stone, and sharp lines, beautiful and cold, the kind of place that made you instinctively lower your voice. As the security guard led her up the steps, Faith's heart thudded hard against her ribs, not because of the wealth around her, but because she knew what this job meant. Rent paid on time, medication for her aunt, maybe a little extra to buy cat food for the strays in her alley. Mrs. Green was waiting at the top of the stairs, clipboard in hand, her smile tight and professional, the kind of expression that never quite reached the eyes because it wasn't there to make anyone feel welcome. "Faith, is it?" the manager asked, and when Faith nodded, she launched straight into the speech she had rehearsed 100 times for 100 employees. Punctuality, discretion, no unnecessary conversation with Mr. Hart, and absolutely no wandering into restricted rooms. Faith signed where she was told, her neat handwriting cramped and a little shaky, as she listened to words like confidentiality and expectations, filing each one carefully in the part of her brain that had learned long ago how to survive other people's rules. "One last thing," Mrs. Green added, as they stepped into the gleaming hallway that smelled faintly of lemon polish and something more sterile. "Stay away from the dog unless explicitly instructed otherwise. He's old, ill-tempered, and sensitive." The word "dog" made Faith's chest tighten with a different kind of awareness, a small involuntary warmth that rose despite her nerves, and she glanced up, catching the tail end of the manager's disapproving look. "He bites?" Faith asked softly, her voice barely lifting above the hush of the hallway, as if even her curiosity might be too loud for this place. "He's unpredictable. Mrs. Green replied, which, to Faith's ears, sounded less like a description of an animal and more like a judgment on anyone who didn't fit neatly into the mansion's routines. They passed an open doorway, and Faith caught a glimpse of a framed photograph on a console table. A younger Michael with softer eyes, his arm around a laughing woman holding a golden puppy whose fur shone like sunlight. The image flickered through her like a ghost, making her wonder what had happened to that version of the man who owned this house, and to the small dog whose eyes were so bright they almost leapt out of the frame. "Your first task is the kitchen wing," Mrs. Green continued briskly, reclaiming Faith's attention. "Deep clean, cupboards, baseboards, the works. Just ignore the far corner if the dog is there. The vet's instructions are already posted and the staff will handle him." Faith nodded obediently, but the word vet hooked into a memory, being 10 years old and holding a shivering stray in her lap on a clinic bench. The way the dog's heartbeat had calmed when she whispered that she was there, even though she couldn't pay the bill. Her mother had scolded her for getting attached, but Faith had never forgotten the way that little animal had looked at her, as if recognizing across the gulf of species and poverty, a soul that understood what it meant to be unwanted. When she stepped into the Heart Kitchen for the first time, she was hit by the shine. Stainless steel stretching in every direction, pristine counters that could have been in a magazine, and the faint, clinical smell of surfaces that had been cleaned more by products than by hands. But underneath all that gleam was another scent, subtle, familiar, and heartbreaking, that pulled at her more strongly than the marble, the appliances, or the rules. The smell of an old dog who had given up on being hungry. Rusty lay on a thick dog bed that had probably cost more than everything she was wearing. Yet somehow, he looked like he belonged to a different world. His coat dull, ribs faintly visible beneath thinning fur, his eyes sunken but intelligent, watching the room without really seeing it. The stainless steel bowl sat a few feet from his nose, piled with untouched food. A second bowl with water reflected the overhead lights in perfect, mocking clarity, as if even the water itself knew it wasn't enough to bring him back. Faith paused at the threshold, her hands tightening around the cleaning caddy as a ripple of emotion moved through her chest. Sorrow, anger, and something tender, all braided together at the sight of a creature whose sadness was louder than any bark. "Don't get too close," one of the cooks said without looking up from the cutting board, his knife moving with practiced speed. "Dog hasn't eaten in 2 weeks and snaps if anyone tries to touch him." Faith swallowed, her gaze still on Rusty, noticing the way his ears twitched faintly at the sound of voices like someone half asleep who no longer trusted that waking up would be worth it. "I won't bother him," she murmured, more to the dog than to anyone else, and moved toward the sink to fill a bucket. But her steps unconsciously softened, instinctively quieter, as if she were entering a room where somebody was grieving. Rusty turned his head a fraction, just enough for her to see the milky haze forming at the edges of his eyes, the kind that came with age and too many goodbyes. Upstairs in his office, Michael watched the same scene on one of his monitors, his finger resting on the trackpad, frozen midway through an email he had no desire to finish. He saw the new cleaning lady enter the kitchen, small, careful, almost disappearing into the background, and he prepared himself to watch her make the same mistake everyone did, trying too hard, moving too fast, assuming love could be forced. But she didn't go to Rusty. She stayed near the sink, setting down her caddy like it was something fragile, and Faith glanced toward the dog with a quiet, open expression that wasn't pity and wasn't fear. It was recognition. Michael leaned a little closer to the screen, the chair creaking beneath him, wondering why that tiny, unremarkable movement made something in his chest shift. Faith wrung out a cloth, the warmth of the water seeping into her fingers, and started with the counters closest to the dog, her strokes slow and rhythmic, deliberately predictable, like a lullaby you sang with your hands instead of your voice. As she worked, she hummed, so softly that the humans in the room barely noticed, but Rusty's ears pricked just enough for the change to register, the faint vibration in the air carrying notes of something gentle and unthreatening. It wasn't a song anyone would recognize, just a wandering melody she had invented years ago, cleaning tiny apartments and comforting scared animals who hid under beds, a tune that said, without words, "I see you. I'm not here to hurt you." Rusty's eyes shifted toward her, just a flicker, as if pulled by the soft thread of her voice, and Faith caught the movement from the corner of her eye, her heart giving a small, hopeful stutter. She didn't smile, didn't gasp, didn't rush closer. She simply kept cleaning the counter, humming steadily, giving him the dignity of not being turned into a spectacle the moment he showed a sign of life. "Miss?" the cook called over his shoulder. Irritation threaded through his tone. "If the dog snarls, just leave him. We're waiting on the vet to call back anyway." Faith's fingers tightened around the cloth, but she only answered, "Of course." Her voice mild, while inside her chest she whispered the same quiet promise she had made to every broken animal she'd ever met. "I won't give up on you just because they already did." Rusty shifted again, his paws scraping softly against the fabric of his bed, and his nose lifted a fraction, sniffing the air not around the bowl of food, but around her, as if trying to place a scent he couldn't quite remember. The camera feed caught it, the almost imperceptible lift of his head, and Michael's breath snagged, his hand hovering above the keyboard as though any movement might scare the image away. "Come on, boy," he whispered to the empty room, the words slipping out before he could stop them, thick with a helplessness that scared him more than any financial risk ever could. He wanted to storm downstairs, wanted to grab the bowl and beg the dog to eat, to live, to stay. But he stayed where he was because he had learned the hard way that begging didn't save anyone, not his wife, not himself, and apparently not his dog. Faith finished the nearby counter and slowly, deliberately, moved closer to the corner, washing the cabinet doors along the way, shortening the distance between them without making it feel like a trap. She lowered herself slightly, not enough to crouch, but enough that she wasn't towering over Rusty. She tilted her body sideways, presenting less of a direct stance, like she had learned to do when approaching scared dogs in alleyways. "Hey, old soul," she murmured under her breath, barely audible, her eyes soft as she pretended to scrub a spot on the lower cabinet. "I'm just passing by, okay? You don't have to do anything." Rusty's gaze locked onto her face, the fog of exhaustion in his eyes parting just enough for interest to slip through, and his tail gave the smallest uncertain twitch against the bed. Faith's heart clenched, but again she did nothing dramatic. She just let the moment breathe, humming quietly, her hands steadily working as if his reaction was the most natural thing in the world. From upstairs, Michael watched the tail flick, his throat tightening with a mix of disbelief and raw, painful hope that he did not want to admit to anyone, not even to himself. For days, the staff had tried to bribe Rusty with treats, toys, and coaxing, all of it loud, desperate, tinged with their own frustration. But this woman was simply existing near him with respect, like she understood that sometimes the bravest thing a heart could do was just stay. "Who are you?" Michael whispered to the screen, his eyes flicking between Rusty and the slight figure in the simple blouse and worn shoes. Faith rinsed her cloth, then hesitated, her gaze dropping to the untouched food bowl. A wave of quiet frustration rose in her chest, not at Rusty, never at him, but at the way everyone had written him off as a problem that couldn't be fixed. She glanced at the cook. "Has anyone tried warming it up or changing the smell?" she asked gently, her tone careful, respectful of kitchen hierarchies she was just now stepping into. The cook snorted. "We've tried everything. Premium brands, home-cooked chicken, bone broth. Dog just wants to die, sweetheart." The word sweetheart slid over her like a greasy fingerprint, but Faith let it pass. She had been called worse by people who cared less. Still, she couldn't ignore the way Rusty's nose had followed her. Not the food, not the hand-waving treats, but her. "Maybe it's not the food," she said softly, almost to herself, as she glanced back at Rusty, whose eyes were now fixed on her as if she were the only thing moving in the room that mattered. And somewhere above, in a quiet office lined with shelves of unopened books and untouched awards, a man who thought he had run out of miracles leaned closer to the screen, unable to look away from the poor, shy cleaning lady who had just become the first person in 2 weeks to make his old dog move. Faith set the cloth aside, her fingers trembling just faintly, not from fear of Rusty, but from the certainty blooming inside her that something important was happening, something fragile enough to shatter if she pushed too fast. She lowered herself 1 inch closer, still angled sideways, her eyes drifting not to Rusty's face but to the floor, letting him observe her without pressure, the way you might give a grieving friend a moment of quiet companionship. Rusty inhaled again, this time deeper, the first full breath he had taken in hours, and his nostrils flared with the smallest spark of curiosity, a recognition of gentleness he hadn't felt in years. Faith noticed. Of course she noticed. She paused her movement entirely and simply let him look. Animals always told their truths in silence first. Behind her, the cook muttered something under his breath about wasting time, but Faith didn't hear it. The world had narrowed to just her and Rusty, as if the bright, sterile kitchen around them had fallen away. She placed her hand carefully on the floor, palm down, a non-threatening signal she had learned from rescuers and shelters, not reaching toward him, just offering the shape of her presence. Rusty's eyes flicked to her hand. A tremor passed through his paw, his breathing hitched, and then, for the first time in 14 days, he lifted his head. Just an inch, just enough that the cook froze, just enough that upstairs Michael inhaled so sharply he nearly dropped his coffee. Faith didn't gasp or smile or celebrate. She only softened her voice into something even gentler. "There you are," she murmured. "Hello, sweetheart." The words slipped out naturally without thinking, an instinct, not a performance, and Rusty's ears twitched at the sound. The cook set down his knife. A dishwasher paused mid-cycle. Even the refrigerator hum seemed quieter, as if the entire kitchen understood it had just witnessed a small miracle. Faith slowly reached into her cleaning caddy and pulled out a folded handkerchief, a cheap one, embroidered with flowers worn from years of use. She unfolded it and placed it on the floor a bit closer to Rusty, not offering it to him, just letting its scent drift. It smelled like lavender soap, cheap fabric softener, and warm human hands. Rusty stretched his neck, sniffed, and weakly, carefully touched the edge of the cloth with his nose. Faith's lips parted in a silent breath, her eyes warming but steady. "Good boy," she whispered. Upstairs, Michael sat back in his chair, staring at the screen like a man who had just seen the ghost of someone he missed. No vet had made Rusty lift his head. No behaviorist had gotten that much response. No expensive product or trick or command had worked. But this cleaning lady, this quiet, timid girl he had hired without a second thought, had walked in and in 5 minutes reached the dog he loved more than most people. "Who is she?" he whispered again, leaning forward, elbows on his desk, his heart thudding harder than it had in months. Faith gently pushed the food bowl an inch, not toward Rusty, but toward the place between them, making it less of a demand and more of an invitation. Rusty didn't eat, but he didn't turn his head away either. And that, to Faith, meant more than a feast. She hummed again, the simple wandering melody that she had carried through years of kitchens and heartbreaks, and the tension in Rusty's shoulders softened, his body easing from rigid fear into something like cautious acceptance. Behind her, Mrs. Green entered the kitchen, heels clicking like a warning bell. She took one look at Faith near the dog and frowned sharply. "I told you to keep your distance," she said, clipped and cold. "That dog is unstable." Faith straightened, but only partially, her gaze flicking from Rusty to the manager with quiet resolve. "He's not unstable," she said softly. "He's scared." Mrs. Green's eyes narrowed. "Excuses won't help you keep this job." Before Faith could respond, a deep voice echoed from the doorway, smooth, low, and edged with a tired authority that made every staff member instantly straighten. "That's enough, Mrs. Green." Michael Hart stood there, hands in his pockets, the weight of sleepless nights and unspoken grief sitting across his shoulders like an old coat. His gaze wasn't cold or harsh. It was exhausted, wounded, and locked entirely on one thing: Faith. More specifically, Faith kneeling beside Rusty, her presence gentle enough to stir the dying, her hands steady in a way that made something inside him unclench for the first time in months. Mrs. Green stiffened. "Sir, I was only enforcing protocol." The dog just lifted his head for the first time in 2 weeks. Michael interrupted quietly. "I saw it." Faith blinked, startled, unsure if she had done something wrong or miraculous. Michael stepped further into the room, his eyes flicking to Rusty, a look full of love, guilt, helplessness, and then back to Faith with something new simmering beneath the surface. Hope. A fragile, dangerous hope he was almost afraid to touch. Faith lowered her eyes, a shy instinct, and Michael felt an unexpected tug behind his ribs, like someone had reached into his chest and turned a light back on. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said to her, his voice quiet but steady. "Please." Faith's breath caught, not because of his authority, but because of the word he chose. "Please." Mrs. Green looked like she had swallowed a lemon. Faith nodded once, shy but sure. "Yes, sir." Rusty lifted his head another inch at the sound of her voice. The cook muttered under his breath, "Well, I'll be damned." Michael stared, disbelief softening into wonder, grief loosening into something almost like relief, and for the first time in a very long time, in that bright, cold kitchen filled with polished steel and quiet suffering, the tiniest spark of life returned to the dog, to the room, and to the man who had forgotten what hope felt like. Faith swallowed the heat rising in her chest, the pressure of too many eyes on her making her fingers stiffen around the cloth, but Rusty's gaze steadied her. His old, cloudy eyes anchored her more than any instruction manual, more than any rule this house had. She turned slightly back toward him, her movements gentle enough to calm a trembling bird, and hummed that same soft melody under her breath. Rusty blinked, slowly, with effort, but he was watching her, really watching. Michael moved closer, each step quiet but weighted with something raw. He didn't want to interrupt whatever was happening, but he also couldn't stand still. Seeing Rusty respond even this little felt like opening a window in a suffocating room. "What were you humming?" Michael asked, his voice low and careful, as though speaking too loudly might undo everything. Faith hesitated, shy eyes flicking upward before dropping again. "Just something I made up. I always do it around animals who are scared." Something about her answer struck him, not the words themselves, but the softness behind them, the way she didn't claim expertise, didn't pretend to know everything, yet somehow understood more than all the expensive specialists he had hired. Rusty let out a faint, hoarse sound, a whine so small it took everyone a second to realize he'd made it. Michael inhaled sharply. "Rusty." Faith didn't reach for the dog. She simply shifted slightly closer. Not enough to intrude, just enough to make her presence easier for him to choose. "You miss someone, don't you?" she whispered, almost to herself. Rusty's ears lowered, and his head drooped in a motion that looked heartbreakingly like a nod. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, grief washing through him in slow waves. His late wife had been the one Rusty adored most. After she died, the dog had never been the same. Neither had he. "What made him stop eating?" Faith asked gently, still kneeling, still providing Rusty a quiet, safe space. Michael rubbed the back of his neck, exhaustion carved into the lines of his face. "The vets say it's age, stress, depression. After..." His voice caught. He swallowed. "After my wife passed, he..." shut down. Faith's heart tightened. She didn't speak condolences. She could feel that this man didn't want the shallow comfort of strangers. What he needed was what Rusty needed. Presence, not pity. "I'm sorry," she murmured softly, and somehow those two quiet words felt nothing like the hollow sympathy he had heard for months. Her sincerity trembled between them like something sacred. Rusty shifted forward on his bed, inch by inch, his nose stretching toward Faith's hand still resting calmly on the floor. Faith didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't breathe too loudly. Her stillness was its own kind of courage. Then, slowly, shakily, Rusty lowered his muzzle to her fingertips. Just a touch. Faith's breath caught in her throat. The cook choked on the air. Mrs. Green's pen dropped from her hand. And Michael felt something inside him crumble. Something brittle and painful and frozen for far too long. Rusty nudged her hand again, this time a little more firmly, as if saying, You're safe." Faith let her fingers curl gently, softly scratching under his chin the way old dogs liked, tentatively at first, then with more steadiness as Rusty released a small broken groan that sounded like relief. "Good boy," she whispered, barely audible. Rusty pushed his head into her palm. Michael stepped closer, unable to stay away, his heart beat loud in his ears. He crouched slowly beside them, his knees popping softly, his breath unsteady. I haven't seen him do that since. Words failed. His throat tightened too much to finish. Faith looked at him, not startled by his presence, not intimidated by his grief, only quietly present. "He remembers, love," she said softly. "He's just been waiting for someone to speak his language again." Speak his language. The phrase struck Michael like a gentle blow. Soft, true, devastating. Rusty settled his weight against Faith's leg, trembling with effort, but trying with everything he had left. "Should I warm the food?" Faith asked quietly. "Not for him to eat yet, just so the smell feels like comfort instead of pressure." Michael blinked at her, surprised. "You'd do that?" Faith tilted her head slightly, puzzled. "Of course. Not to impress him. Not to defy Mrs. Green. Not for a job. Because she cared. Because kindness was her instinct, not a strategy." "Okay," he whispered, voice thick. "Yes, please." She rose slowly, giving Rusty a moment to adjust, then took the bowl with gentle hands and walked to the stove. Rusty watched her go. His eyes followed her like she was the first light after a long winter. Michael noticed, and something warm and dangerous ignited in his chest. While Faith stirred the food in a small pot, adding a splash of warm broth, her actions unhurried and loving, Michael stayed kneeling by Rusty, his hand hovering but never touching. When Faith returned, the aroma soft and inviting, Rusty lifted his head toward her again, hopeful, curious, alive. Faith knelt beside him and placed the bowl near his paws. Rusty leaned in, sniffed, and for the first time in 14 days, his tongue touched the food. A tiny bite, barely anything, but enough. Faith gasped softly. Michael's eyes stung. Rusty took another lick. Another. It wasn't a meal. It wasn't a recovery. It wasn't a miracle. But it was life, returning. And in that quiet, trembling moment, with Rusty eating between them, with Faith's eyes wide and luminous, with Michael's breath breaking into a shaky laugh, something else began to heal too. Something neither of them had expected to find in the cold kitchen of a grieving mansion. The very first seed of hope. "Faith," Michael whispered, voice unsteady. "I don't know how you did that." She looked up, cheeks warm, eyes shy. "I didn't do anything magical, sir. I just listened." Michael stared at her, really stared, and realized with a slow, dawning ache that she wasn't just speaking about Rusty. She was speaking about him too. Faith stayed beside Rusty while he took a few more tentative licks, each one slow and trembling, as if he were relearning the motion of eating after weeks of forgetting what hunger felt like. She didn't cheer, didn't gasp, didn't call attention to the moment. She only watched him with soft, steady eyes that told him he wasn't alone. Michael, still kneeling, felt tears prick behind his eyes. Hot, sharp, unexpected. He blinked them away quickly, because crying in front of staff felt like exposing a wound he'd kept hidden for too long. But Faith didn't even look at him in a way that suggested she'd noticed. She didn't intrude on his grief. She simply existed beside it. Rusty nudged the bowl weakly, then rested his head on the bed again, exhausted by the small effort, but no longer disconnected from the world. "That's enough for now," Faith whispered, lowering the bowl slightly. "Just a taste. You did so well." Michael swallowed hard. She spoke to Rusty like he was a person, like his struggle was valid, meaningful, worthy of gentleness. "Is he okay?" Michael asked, the words raw as if dragged across gravel. Faith looked up at him and offered something he hadn't felt in a long time, a reassuring expression that wasn't false hope, wasn't clinical detachment. It was grounded, warm, honest. "He's not giving up," she said softly. "That's a start." Mrs. Green, who had been hovering with the stiffness of a statue, finally found her voice. "Well, that was sheer luck. Animals are unpredictable. Let's not assume this changes anything." Faith lowered her eyes immediately, shrinking into herself. But Michael turned sharply toward the manager. "No," he said, his tone quiet but commanding. "This does change something." Mrs. Green stiffened. "Sir, that'll be all?" The dismissal was polite but final, the kind of tone that closed a door without slamming it. Mrs. Green hesitated, lips pressed into a disappointed line, before retreating from the room. When she was gone, Faith let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her shoulders relaxing the slightest bit. Michael noticed. "You don't need to be afraid of her," he murmured. Faith blinked, startled. "I'm not afraid, just trying not to cause trouble." Michael's brows tightened, not in irritation with her, but in frustration at the thought that she had been made to feel small in his house. "You didn't cause trouble," he said. "You helped him." Faith's blush deepened. She looked down at her hands, small, calloused, steady. "I just did what I know, that's all." Michael wanted to say, "It wasn't just," but Rusty let out a soft grunt, drawing their attention. Faith immediately leaned near him again, her voice gentle. "Tired, huh? You can rest. I'm not going anywhere." Rusty's tail brushed the bed once. Michael felt his throat tighten again. He rubbed the back of his neck, unsure what to do with the vulnerable, disoriented feeling building inside him. "You, like animals," he said, stating the obvious just to fill the silence. Faith smiled faintly. Small, quiet, almost shy, the kind of smile that bloomed like a secret. "I grew up with them. Strays mostly. Cats, dogs, even a goat once." "A goat?" Michael echoed, blinking. She nodded. "She followed me home from a garbage alley. My mom wasn't happy." Despite the heaviness of the moment, Michael let out a soft, huffed laugh, the first real laugh he'd made in weeks. It startled him. Faith looked down quickly, embarrassed. but Rusty nuzzled her hand as if agreeing that the sound was a good one. Michael watched the way Rusty responded to her, something warm blooming beneath his ribs. He hadn't thought warmth was possible anymore. "You said earlier, he's not unstable, just scared," he said quietly. "How did you know?" Faith hesitated, brushing her fingers lightly over Rusty's ear. "Eyes," she murmured. "They tell you everything. Anger looks different than fear. So does hopelessness." She said it with such calm certainty that Michael felt a shiver run through him. Eyes tell you everything. He wondered what she saw when she looked at him. "Most people look at an animal and see behavior," Faith continued softly. "But behavior is just the surface. Hurt lives underneath." Michael swallowed. His gaze drifted to Rusty, then to Faith. "And what do you think is underneath for him?" Faith's voice lowering to a gentle hush. "Loss." The word hit Michael like a punch. Because it was true, because he carried it too. Faith didn't push further. She didn't pry or ask about his past. She simply let the truth settle in the space between them with a quiet understanding that made Michael's chest ache. Rusty shifted again, pressing closer to her knee. "He trusts you," Michael whispered, unable to hide the awe in his voice. "Already?" Faith shook her head. "No, not trust. Not yet. Just relief that someone is listening." Michael felt something crack inside him, a fissure in the armor he had worn since his wife died. He didn't know how to respond, so he simply watched her, this timid girl with tired shoes and warm hands, calm his dying dog with nothing but presence. Presence he hadn't known how to give. "Faith," he said quietly. "Could you—" He hesitated, unusually unsure. She waited, eyes gentle. "Yes? Would you stay for a bit longer? With him?" She blinked, surprised, maybe even a little confused that a man like him would ask instead of order. "Yes, sir." Rusty settled back onto his bed, eyelids drooping, comforted by the soft cadence of Faith's breathing beside him. And Michael remained kneeling, watching the two beings who had somehow found each other in the coldest room of his house, feeling something shift in the air, a quiet, fragile beginning of healing for all three of them. Faith stayed kneeling beside Rusty even after the dog drifted into a shallow, peaceful doze. She didn't pet him excessively or hover. She simply remained close enough that if he opened his eyes, he would see her there, steady, quiet, constant. Michael rose slowly from the floor, knees stiff, emotions even stiffer. He stepped back just enough to give them space, though some part of him felt strangely tethered to the scene, like leaving too far would break something delicate that had just begun to mend. "Do you need anything?" he asked, the question directed at Faith, not Rusty, an unusual reversal in a house where everyone served him. Faith shook her head. "No, sir. I'm okay." Michael looked almost relieved, though he wasn't sure why. He found himself staring at her again, not because of her appearance or even her kindness, but because she carried something he hadn't seen in this house for years. A softness that didn't weaken anything, only strengthened it. He cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how long he had been watching. "You can sit, if you'd like. You don't have to kneel on the floor." Faith glanced up, startled by the offer, as if she wasn't used to someone caring whether she was comfortable. "I'm fine, really," she said gently. Rusty shifted and her attention immediately returned to him. Michael noticed the instinctive prioritization. Her own discomfort meant nothing if someone else needed care. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't usually come in here this time of day." Faith nodded without looking up. "It's okay. I understand." But he wasn't sure she did. Most people tiptoed around him, not out of respect, but out of fear or superstition or shallow fascination with his wealth. Faith, on the other hand, wasn't tiptoeing around him at all. She was tiptoeing around the dog, and around grief itself. "You said earlier you grew up with strays," Michael said, settling into a stool near the island counter. His voice was softer than usual, like he didn't want to disturb the rhythm she had created. Faith nodded. "Yes, they seemed to find me, or maybe I found them." Michael gave a faint exhale that wasn't quite a laugh. "And your family didn't mind the surprises?" Faith's lips curved into a small, tired smile. "My mom minded the vet bills, but she had a soft heart too. She just had too many responsibilities to show it." "Do you have any animals now?" he asked. Faith hesitated. Then, shyly, "Not officially." Michael raised an eyebrow. She glanced up sheepishly. "There's a cat behind my building. He's missing an ear, and everyone calls him Trouble, but you feed him?" She nodded with a faint blush. "I try." Michael found his chest warming in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't infatuation. It wasn't attraction. Not yet. It was recognition, of kindness without witnesses, of devotion without applause. Rusty let out a contented sigh, the first peaceful sound Michael had heard from him in weeks. Faith's hand hovered near the dog's ear, not petting, just being there. "What's his name?" she asked quietly. "Rusty," Michael answered. "My wife named him. She said he had an old soul even as a puppy." Faith smiled softly. "She sounds lovely." Michael felt his throat constrict. She was. For a long moment, Faith said nothing. She didn't offer pity or ask intrusive questions. She simply nodded once, acknowledging the weight behind the words. It was a relief, a strange, almost unsettling relief, to not be smothered with condolences or platitudes. Rusty stirred again, and Faith gently steadied her hand near him. "He's not just sick," she whispered. "He's heartbroken." Michael flinched, not visibly but somewhere deep inside, because that wasn't just Rusty. That was him too. "How did you know?" he murmured, voice barely above a breath. Faith's eyes lifted, steady and gentle. "Because heartbreak looks the same, no matter the species." The words landed between them like truth laid bare. Michael exhaled shakily, the tension in his shoulders loosening more than he intended. "Faith," he said quietly, "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," she replied. "I'm just doing my job." But she wasn't. Not like this. Not with this depth. Not with a tenderness money couldn't buy. Michael walked closer again, stopping just beside Rusty's bed. He knelt, not to inspect, not to intervene, but to share the moment. Rusty lifted his head at the sound of Michael's breath, then looked between the two of them, and for the first time in weeks, his tail thumped weakly against the floor. Michael's eyes widened, a tear slipping free before he could stop it. Faith pretended not to see it, looking at Rusty instead and letting Michael keep his pride. "Faith," Michael whispered, voice breaking. "He hasn't looked at me like that since." He couldn't finish, but he didn't need to. Faith nodded softly. "He knows you're hurting too." Michael let out a breath, long, shaky, exhausted. "No one here has said that," he murmured. Faith's voice was gentle. "They didn't have to. Rusty did." Michael lowered his head, pressing his palm to Rusty's fur, feeling warmth beneath his fingers. Faith watched them, her quiet presence turning the cold kitchen into something softer, almost sacred. For the first time in that enormous house, the grief didn't feel like drowning. It felt shared, held. Rusty closed his eyes, nestling between them, and a thin thread of connection formed, from dog to girl to man, fragile, tender, alive. Faith whispered, "He's going to fight now." Michael breathed out, trembling but hopeful. "Because of you." Faith shook her head. "Because someone finally listened." And Michael, a man who thought he'd lost the ability to feel anything but emptiness, realized she was talking about more than the dog. Rusty shifted closer to Faith, his breathing evening out into something steady, something peaceful, something alive. Faith adjusted her position just slightly so he could rest more comfortably against her knee, careful not to overstimulate him. Michael watched the movement, watched the gentleness in her fingertips, watched the way her presence seemed to soften the very air around them. Something inside him loosened like a fist unclenching after holding on for far too long. "You have a gift," he murmured quietly, unable to keep the awe from his voice. Faith shook her head immediately, her cheeks coloring. "No, I've just spent a long time around animals that needed help, but they don't all respond like this," he insisted softly, nodding toward Rusty. "He hasn't reacted to anyone, not even me." Faith gently touched Rusty's cheek, her hand trembling ever so slightly. "Sometimes animals trust people who carry the same kind of wounds." Michael stilled. The words struck deeper than she knew. His gaze lowered to Rusty, whose graying muzzle pressed into Faith's palm with a frail but unmistakable need for comfort. Michael felt an ache coil in his chest, a familiar one he had pushed down relentlessly since the day his wife died. "Tell me something," Faith whispered, still looking at Rusty. "Before he stopped eating, did something happen? Something that changed his routine?" Michael inhaled slowly. "Yes, my wife's sister visited. She said Rusty should start sleeping outside the bedroom, that he was old, smelled bad, and was making the house look unkept." Faith's jaw tightened the smallest bit, though her expression stayed composed. "Did you agree?" Michael let out a breath, pressing a hand against his forehead. "I didn't disagree fast enough." Faith finally looked at him, really looked. Her eyes held a softness that didn't judge him, only understood. Old dogs feel rejection deeply. They're like children, or elderly people. They know when they've been pushed away. Michael closed his eyes briefly. Regret rolled through him like a slow, heavy tide. She told him to go, he whispered, and he walked away. I didn't stop it soon enough. Faith nodded, her voice gentle. Then he didn't stop eating because he wanted to die. He stopped because he felt forgotten. The words hit like truth forged in fire. Not cruel, but honest. Needed. Michael swallowed hard, emotion tightening every muscle in his body. I never meant for him to feel that. I know, she whispered. And so does he. That's why he lifted his head when he heard your voice. Michael blinked. You saw that? Faith smiled faintly, eyes soft. He's been listening for you. He didn't have the strength to come, but he waited. Michael's jaw trembled. He wasn't a man who cried. Not in public, not in private. But something about her tone, her understanding, made tears rise anyway. Faith didn't call attention to it, didn't offer comfort, didn't reach toward him. She simply existed with him in the moment. Quiet, steady, unintrusive. And that somehow was more comforting than anything anyone had tried to say since the funeral. Rusty nudged Michael's hand with his nose, weak but intentional. Oh, buddy, Michael whispered, his voice cracking. He stroked Rusty's fur, leaning down so his forehead barely touched the dog's side. I'm so sorry. Faith looked away, respecting the intimacy of the moment. Her gaze drifted to the shining appliances, the sterile walls, the cold perfection of the mansion. It struck her how lonely a house could be, even when filled with people. After a long moment, Rusty shifted again, this time nudging toward Faith as well. Michael lifted his head. He wants you close too. Faith hesitated. Only if it doesn't bother you. Michael shook his head, a breathy laugh escaping him. Faith, you're the first thing in weeks that hasn't bothered me. The comment hung in the air, unexpectedly intimate. Faith's cheeks warmed. Michael realized what he'd said and looked away, a hint of color touching his own face. Rusty settled between them, content. Faith studied him thoughtfully. He might eat more if he feels comfortable. Would it be okay if I tried something tomorrow? Something simple? What did you have in mind? Michael asked. Routine, she replied gently. Presence. Sitting with him. Talking to him. Maybe feeding him by hand for a while. Michael blinked, surprised. You'd do that? Faith nodded. If you'll allow it. Michael exhaled slowly, deeply. He looked at her with an expression almost reverent. Faith, you don't need permission to help him. Not anymore. She nodded shyly. Rusty shifted, letting out a small whine. Faith stroked his head softly. I think he's asking for you, she murmured. Michael crouched closer again, placing a hand beside hers on Rusty's fur. Their fingers almost touched, close enough to feel the warmth of each other's skin. Both of them felt it. Both pretended not to. Rusty sighed happily, an old dog sigh, fragile and full of gratitude. Faith whispered, he feels safe with both of us here. Michael nodded slowly, eyes locked on hers. So do I. Faith's breath caught. She looked down quickly, flustered, but Michael didn't take the words back. He realized with a strange, dawning clarity that he meant them, and that maybe Rusty wasn't the only one who had stopped eating emotionally. Maybe he had stopped living too, and maybe this shy poor cleaning lady with her warm hands and her quiet courage was the first person who'd stepped into the cold of his grief without flinching. Rusty nestled deeper between them. Faith smiled softly. Michael breathed a little easier than he had in months. A tiny, fragile beginning was taking shape, and none of them dared disturb it. Rusty dozed again, his breath warm and steady against Faith's knee. For a moment, the world felt impossibly small, just the three of them in a pool of quiet light, suspended above the cold weight of the mansion and all its unspoken sorrows. Eventually, Faith shifted, careful not to disturb the dog. She picked up her cleaning cloth again, almost apologetically, as if returning to her job might break the fragile peace Rusty had worked so hard to create. You don't have to clean right now, Michael said softly, watching her movements with a troubled kind of tenderness as if he hated the idea of breaking the spell. Faith shook her head. I don't want to fall behind. Michael frowned. She wasn't behind. She had been saving his dog's life, but he could tell she didn't believe she deserved any leniency. Faith, he murmured, what you did for Rusty, that matters more than polished counters. She froze for half a heartbeat, as if unused to being valued for anything beyond her labor. Then she nodded once, quietly. Rusty twitched and let out a soft huff. Faith set aside the cloth again, instantly returning to him. Michael watched the instinctive motion and felt something inside him warm, slow, deep, awakening. "He likes the sound of your voice," Michael said softly. Faith paused, surprised. "My voice? Every time you speak, he lifts his ears," Michael explained. "He's listening, even when his eyes are shut." Faith looked down at Rusty with a tenderness so deep it made Michael's breath catch. "I'm glad he's not alone," she whispered. "You make sure of that," Michael said, unable to hide the admiration threading through his voice. Faith blinked, cheeks warming with shy color, but before she could respond, a sudden clatter echoed from the hallway. Sharp, metallic, intrusive. Rusty flinched violently, a tremor ripping through his frail body. Faith's hand immediately moved to his side, soothing him with a soft, "It's okay, sweetheart, it's okay." Michael's jaw clenched. He stood quickly and stepped toward the doorway. Mrs. Green appeared holding a fallen tray. "Apologies for the noise," she said stiffly, though her eyes flicked to Rusty with poorly concealed annoyance. "Is he really still in here?" Michael's eyes hardened. "He will stay wherever he needs to stay." Mrs. Green visibly swallowed. "Of course, sir." But her gaze slid to Faith, clearly irritated that the cleaning lady was still kneeling so close to the dog. "Miss, you weren't hired to—" Michael cut in, his tone sharp as glass. "She's helping him, and she's doing more for him than anyone else has." Faith's head lowered shyly, but not out of shame, out of the strange discomfort of being defended. Mrs. Green retreated, lips thin with tension. When she disappeared, Michael turned back to Faith. "I'm sorry," he said. "You shouldn't be spoken to like that." Faith shook her head. "It's all right. She's just doing her job." "No," Michael murmured. "You're doing your job, and you're doing it better than she realizes." Faith opened her mouth, then closed it again, unprepared for such direct kindness. Rusty nudged her hand again, grounding the moment. "What time is your shift supposed to end?" Michael asked softly. Faith checked the time. 6, but I can stay later if needed." "You've already worked enough for today," Michael said. "You should get home safely before dark." Faith looked conflicted. "But Rusty, I'll stay with him," Michael said quietly. Faith paused, searching his face. "Talk to him," she said. "Even if he doesn't move. He hears you." Michael nodded, slow, reverent. "I will." Faith hesitated again, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the small embroidered handkerchief Rusty had sniffed earlier. She placed it beside him. "For comfort," she whispered. Michael stared at the faded fabric, stunned by how something so simple could carry so much meaning. "You're very kind," he murmured, voice low. Faith looked down, wide-eyed, unsure how to receive the praise. "I just do what I can. That's more than enough," he said. Rusty whimpered softly, sensing her impending departure. Faith leaned down, brushing her fingers along his cheek in a soft goodbye. "I'll come back tomorrow," she whispered. The dog's tail gave a weak thump. Michael's heart twisted. Faith stood slowly, suddenly very small in the immense kitchen. She grabbed her bag, hesitated one last time, then stepped toward the door. Michael followed her with his gaze, something unspoken lingering between them. Just before she disappeared down the hallway, Faith turned back. "Thank you, Mr. Hart," she said softly. "For what?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "For letting me help." Then she slipped away. Michael returned to Rusty's side, lowering himself to the floor with a quiet sigh. The house felt different now, not healed, not mended, but no longer suffocating. Rusty shifted, resting his head near the handkerchief Faith had left behind. Michael reached out, smoothing the dog's fur with trembling fingers. "She's something, isn't she?" he whispered. Rusty's tail moved once. Michael exhaled. "Yes," he murmured. "She really is." Outside, the sun dipped toward evening, and for the first time since his wife died, Michael didn't dread the night. He had someone, to look forward to tomorrow. Faith walked down the long hallway with her head slightly bowed, her steps light but her heart strangely heavy. She wasn't used to leaving a place and feeling pulled back, not by obligation, not by fear, but by a quiet, unexpected bond. Rusty had looked at her like she mattered. Mr. Hart, Michael, had spoken to her like she wasn't invisible. That alone was enough to make her fingers tremble as she clutched her bag against her chest. She stepped out through the side entrance the staff used and paused in the fresh air, breathing deeply, trying to steady herself. The mansion behind her looked less like a cold monument and more like a quiet beast trying to heal. The knowledge that she would return tomorrow settled warm and steady inside her. Back in the kitchen, Michael stayed sitting on the floor beside Rusty long after Faith was gone. He stroked the dog's fur with slow, careful motions, whispering things he hadn't said out loud in years. "I'm sorry I didn't see it," he murmured. "I'm sorry you felt alone." Rusty shifted, pressing closer to him. Michael's breath shook. He thought of Faith's words. Heartbreak looks the same no matter the species. And for the first time he let himself acknowledge that his grief wasn't just sadness. It was abandonment, loss, fear, and something about Faith had cracked open a door inside him he didn't know was still there. He watched Rusty's weak tail swish once against the floor and let the smallest smile lift the corner of his mouth. "She's good for you," he whispered. Rusty nudged his hand. Michael chuckled weakly. "And apparently she's good for me too." He stayed with the dog until well after dark. The house staff drifted around quietly, whispering in the halls with a newfound caution. Because for the first time in months their employer wasn't shut away, or silently raging or wandering like a ghost. He was present, grounded, human. The next morning, Faith arrived early, earlier than required, earlier than she admitted even to herself she wanted to be there. Her hair was tied back neatly, her blouse freshly washed even though the fabric was thinning, and her steps were quicker than usual. Her stomach fluttered with nerves, not fear of the job, but fear that yesterday had been a fragile miracle that might not repeat itself. What if Rusty didn't react the same way today? What if he'd retreated again? What if Mr. Hart regretted letting her near him? The front door opened before she could finish the spiral. It wasn't the guard or the staff waiting there. It was Michael. He stood in the doorway wearing a soft gray sweater and loosened slacks, looking far more human than she'd ever seen him. There were shadows under his eyes, yes, but also a quiet, hesitant warmth. "Good morning," he said. His voice was softer than it had been the day before. Faith blinked, startled. "Good morning, sir." He stepped aside to let her in. "You're early." She nodded. "I wanted to check on Rusty." Michael held her gaze for a moment too long, something unspoken shimmering between them. Gratitude, vulnerability, and something else neither dared name. "He's waiting for you," Michael said gently. "He hasn't moved much this morning, but..." His ears perked up when I said your name. Faith's breath caught. "He remembers me." A faint smile touched Michael's lips. Small, weary, but real. Very much. She followed him through the hall, past rooms colder than winter, until they reached the kitchen. And there he was, Rusty curled on his bed, frail but alert, his cloudy eyes fixed on the doorway. When Faith stepped in, his tail thumped, weakly, softly, but unmistakably. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, moving toward him. Michael watched from the counter, arms crossed loosely, not in defensiveness but in quiet awe. The staff paused their work, observing from the periphery. No one dared interrupt. Faith knelt beside Rusty, her movements smooth and grounding. "Did you miss me?" she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Rusty nudged her hand. Her smile bloomed like a sunrise. She checked his bowls, then looked up at Michael. "Did he eat anything last night?" "A little," Michael said. "Not much, but more than before." "That's good," Faith murmured. "Slow is good." Michael hesitated, then stepped closer until he stood by her side. "I thought you might want to take the lead again." Faith blinked, cheeks warming. "Only if you want me to." "I do," he said, too quickly, too honestly. He cleared his throat. "Rusty does." Faith hid a shy smile. She placed her hand near Rusty's head again, humming softly. The dog's breathing steadied, his body relaxing in the familiar comfort. Michael watched, studying Faith's face with a quiet intensity. The way she moved, the way she breathed, the way she cared. Something inside him tightened and softened at the same time. "You make it look so easy," he said quietly. Faith shook her head. "It's not easy, just important." Michael breathed in as if the words themselves had struck something deep. Important. No one had called anything in this house important in a long time. Faith turned her attention to Rusty again. "I'd like to try hand-feeding him, if that's okay." Michael nodded. "Whatever you think is best." And he meant it, unreservedly. Faith took a small portion of softened food, warmed just enough to smell comforting. She offered a tiny bit on her fingers. Rusty hesitated, sniffed, then, slowly, licked it from her hand. Faith exhaled shakily. Michael closed his eyes in relief. Rusty took another, then another. Not a meal, not a recovery, but a beginning. A A real, tangible beginning. Faith looked up at Michael. Her eyes were bright, not with pride, but with hope. "He wants to live," she whispered. Michael's throat tightened. "Then we'll help him." Faith nodded. "Together," she added softly. Michael's breath caught. The word hit with gentle force. Together. Something shifted between them. Not dramatic, not forced, but deep. Subtle. Undeniable. Rusty nudged both of their hands at once, as if putting a seal on the quiet promise forming in the room. Faith laughed softly. Light, shy, pure. Michael's lips curved in response before he could stop himself. For a moment, the enormous kitchen felt warm again. Lived in. Human. And as Rusty rested his head across both of their hands, Michael knew this wasn't just Rusty's healing arc. It was his, and Faith's, interwoven in ways he was only beginning to understand. Rusty rested with his head across both of their hands, an old soul anchoring two wounded hearts without even knowing he was doing it. Faith's hand remained steady beneath his muzzle, her thumb brushing gently over the soft fur by his cheek. Michael didn't move, couldn't move, not because he was afraid of breaking the moment, though he was, but because something inside him felt settled for the first time in far too long. Faith smiled faintly, her voice soft enough to feel like a warm blanket wrapped around a cold morning. "He's calmer today," Michael nodded, staring at Rusty as though memorizing every breath. "Because of you." Faith didn't argue this time. She only lowered her gaze shyly as though the acceptance of her own impact was too big, too heavy, too unfamiliar. Michael watched her, the curve of her lashes, the way her hands communicated more kindness than most people expressed in years. He cleared his throat softly. "Have you ever considered working with animals professionally?" Faith blinked, surprised. "Me? No, I never." She hesitated. "I never had the chance. Cleaning was what paid the bills." Michael's gaze softened. "You'd be incredible at it." Her cheeks warmed and she looked down again. "I don't know about that." "I do," he said quietly, sincerely. Faith gently lifted Rusty's head to adjust the blanket beneath him. "Animals don't need much from humans," she murmured. "Just patience, safety, someone who doesn't rush them." Michael swallowed. "That sounds like something you learned the hard way." Faith stilled, fingers tightening slightly in Rusty's fur. She didn't answer right away. The kitchen felt suddenly still, like the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. Then Faith spoke, her voice quieter than ever. "I grew up in places where people didn't always have time for gentleness." Michael's chest tightened. "Faith, it's okay," she whispered quickly. "I'm not saying it for pity, just explaining." He shook his head. "You shouldn't have had to learn kindness by giving it when no one gave it to you." Faith finally looked up at him. Her eyes were deep, warm, impossibly honest, and Michael felt something in him unravel just a little. Rusty shifted closer to Faith, sensing the heaviness. She stroked his ear, grounding herself in the familiar motion. "Kindness doesn't cost anything," Faith said softly, "but not everyone can afford to give it." Michael stared at her humility, at her quiet strength, at the way she wore vulnerability like armor, not weakness. "You're remarkable," he murmured before he could stop himself. Faith's breath caught, her eyes widened, then darted down again, flustered. "No, I'm not." "You are," he insisted gently. Rusty lifted his head and nudged Michael's hand in agreement, prompting a quiet laugh from both of them. Faith exhaled shakily, trying to hide the smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you know." Michael nodded slightly. It meant more than he knew too. Rusty shifted again, and Faith leaned in, helping him settle. "You should try feeding him again," she said softly to Michael. Michael blinked, caught off guard. "Me?" Faith nodded. "He needs to reconnect with you too. If he'll take food from me, he might take some from you." Michael hesitated. "What if he refuses?" "Then he refuses," Faith said gently. "But you try anyway. Because trying is love." The word hit him with quiet force. He took a breath. Faith placed a softened bit of food in his palm, her fingers brushing his skin, a tiny contact, but enough to send a warm ripple through him. He knelt beside Rusty, his hand trembling slightly. Rusty sniffed, and slowly, painfully, licked his palm. Michael's breath broke into a shaky exhale. Faith smiled, her eyes glowing with quiet pride. "He's forgiving you," she whispered. Michael's eyes stung. He blinked quickly, but one tear escaped. Faith pretended not to see it. Rusty nudged his head under Michael's free hand, seeking comfort. Michael stroked him, voice fragile. "I'm so sorry, old boy." Faith looked away again, giving him privacy in his grief. But even in her silence, her presence was a balm, steadying him through the moment. After a few minutes, Rusty drifted off to sleep again, full enough to rest, tired enough to need healing. Faith rose slowly, stretching her knees. "He should sleep for a while, that's good." Michael stood too, watching her with something soft in his eyes, something that hadn't lived there in years. "Would you?" He paused, surprisingly nervous. "Would you stay a little longer? Not for work, just for company, if you want." Faith blinked, startled. "Company?" Michael nodded, looking suddenly younger. "This house gets loud when it's quiet. I wouldn't mind not being alone for a moment." Faith looked down at her hands, shy, overwhelmed by the request. "I can stay," she whispered. Michael exhaled, relieved, grateful, something else too fragile to name. They sat at the small kitchen table, Rusty sleeping peacefully between them, the morning light warming the room in soft gold. Faith folded her hands in her lap, unsure where to look. Michael studied her carefully, the silence between them comfortable instead of cold. "You make this house feel different," he said quietly. Faith's breath hitched. I'm just cleaning, sir." "No," Michael whispered, shaking his head. "You're healing things here none of us even realized were broken." Faith didn't know how to answer. Her cheeks warmed, her heart fluttered, and Michael realized, dangerously, gently, that he was beginning to feel something he hadn't expected to feel again. Something real, something new, something terrifyingly human. As Rusty slept peacefully between them, a thin thread connected the man and the girl, fragile, tender, and quietly growing stronger. Rusty slept soundly, his old chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, proof of the fragile hope returning to him. Every so often his tail twitched, brushing against Faith's shoe or Michael's boot, as if reminding them both that he was still here, still fighting, still choosing to stay. Faith kept glancing toward him, making sure each of his breaths was even. She didn't hover in panic. She watched with the calm attentiveness of someone who understood that healing wasn't loud or dramatic. It was slow, quiet, earned. Michael couldn't stop watching her, the way she sat at the table with her hands folded, like she was afraid to disturb the stillness, the way her shoulders lifted and fell with careful breaths, as though she didn't quite believe she belonged in this warm moment, the way she looked at Rusty with pure, unobstructed care. He hadn't seen care like that since his wife, not from anyone. Not in this house. Michael cleared his throat softly. "Did you sleep well?" Faith startled a little. She hadn't expected small talk. "Oh, yes, I did, thank you." "You seem tired," he observed gently. Faith hesitated, then admitted, "I live a little far. I woke up early to get here." Guilt pricked his chest. This house had a dozen unused rooms, and she was making long bus rides in the cold to care for his dog. "If you ever need a ride home," he said carefully, "I can arrange it. You don't need to walk or take the bus so late." Faith's eyes widened. "Oh no, sir. I don't want to be a burden." Michael shook his head. "You're not a burden. You're the opposite." Faith looked down again, cheeks coloring. She wasn't used to hearing those words. Rusty shifted on his bed, grumbling softly in his sleep. Faith immediately rose and knelt beside him, instinct leading her movements. She reached out and stroked his head gently. "Hey, it's okay, Rusty. You're safe." Michael walked over too, lowering himself onto his haunches beside them. Rusty's eyes fluttered open, landing on Faith first. Recognition, relief, trust, and then on Michael. His tail brushed the floor. Michael smiled. "There he is." Rusty stretched his neck slightly, nudging Faith's wrist. She let out a soft laugh. "He's asking for more breakfast." Michael's eyebrows rose with amused disbelief. "After 2 weeks of refusing food, he's asking?" Faith nodded proudly. "He wants to live." Michael swallowed hard. "Because of you." Faith shook her head. "Because he's loved." Michael looked at her for a long moment. There it was, the truth he'd been avoiding. Faith wasn't saving Rusty for Michael. She was saving Rusty because she was incapable of doing anything less than caring fully. He stood slowly and touched Rusty's bowl, preparing a little more food. "Will you show me how to feed him again?" Faith smiled softly. "Of course." Together they warmed the food, Faith guiding Michael's hands, not touching much, but enough for their fingers to brush occasionally, sending small sparks through both of them. Michael fed Rusty while Faith kept her hand on the dog's chest, grounding him. Rusty ate the softened portion slowly, but with more intention than the day before. When he finished, Faith wiped his mouth with the same embroidered handkerchief she'd left yesterday. Michael noticed the delicate stitching. "Did you make that?" Faith paused. "Yes. My aunt taught me. I repair clothes for extra money sometimes." Michael leaned in slightly. "It's beautiful work." She blushed again, unused to the compliment. "Thank you." Rusty nosed between them as if impatient with the quiet, tender tension forming. Faith laughed softly. Michael chuckled under his breath. Then the dog curled again, resting with a sigh that sounded, finally, peaceful. Faith sat down on the floor beside him. Michael sat too, close, closer than yesterday, not touching, but sharing the same small space, sharing warmth, sharing silence that no longer felt heavy. Faith spoke first. "He's going to need routine, care, gentle feeding, someone with him at night." Michael nodded. "I'll hire someone to stay overnight if needed." Faith hesitated. "I could stay late sometimes if you want." Michael looked at her sharply, softly, not in alarm. "You would do that?" Faith nodded. "I don't like the thought of him being scared or lonely." Michael breathed out, something shifting inside him. "I would appreciate that more than you know." For a moment their eyes met. The connection was there. Quiet, earnest, undeniable. Faith looked away shyly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Michael looked away too, overwhelmed by the warmth rising in his chest. Rusty, perceptive in ways old dogs often are, nudged both of their legs at once, as if nudging two puzzle pieces closer together. Faith giggled. Michael smiled, and the kitchen felt more like a home than it had in a long time. "Faith," Michael said softly, watching her with gratitude he didn't bother hiding. "I don't know what I did to deserve this kindness, to deserve you here." Faith shook her head, eyes gentle. "You didn't need to do anything. I'm here because Rusty needed someone to listen." Michael inhaled deeply, the emotion in his chest too large to ignore. "And I think maybe I did too," he whispered. Faith froze, breath catching. Her cheeks warmed. Rusty thumped his tail, and in that fragile, quiet moment, something unmistakable blossomed between them. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of something tender, brave, and undeniably real. Rusty drifted into another soft sleep, his breathing rhythmic and warm against the quiet of the kitchen. Faith stayed seated on the tiled floor, her back lightly against a lower cabinet, her knees bent, her hands resting loosely in her lap. She looked peaceful, almost ethereal in the morning light that streamed through the tall windows. Michael remained beside her, not quite touching, not quite distant, finding a strange comfort simply sitting in silence next to her. The kind of silence that didn't demand anything, the kind that healed. After a long moment, Faith spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's stronger today." Michael nodded. "You did that." Faith lowered her gaze. "We did that." Michael's breath caught at the humility woven into those 4 words. She gave away credit the way other people clung to it, easily, sincerely, without expecting anything in return. He looked at her more closely. Her blouse was slightly wrinkled at the shoulder, her shoes scuffed, her hair tied back with a simple elastic that was beginning to fray. She was the furthest thing from the polished, glamorous people who often drifted through his orbit, and yet she was the most genuine soul he'd encountered in years. "Faith," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" She glanced at him shyly. "Yes, sir." "Do you have anyone waiting for you at home? Family? Friends?" Faith blinked, surprised by the question. "Just my aunt. She's sick most days, but she tries her best. I take care of her." Michael felt a tug in his chest. "You do everything alone, don't you?" Faith hesitated, then nodded. "Most things, but it's okay. I'm used to it." Michael breathed in deeply, fighting the urge to say what rose instinctively. "You shouldn't have to be." Instead, he asked gently, "And do you have anyone who takes care of you?" Faith looked down at her hands, her voice so soft he almost didn't hear it. "No, sir, but I don't need much." "You deserve more than not much," Michael murmured. Her cheeks warmed with a quiet, startled emotion, like no one had ever told her she deserved anything before. Rusty shifted, his paw landing lightly on Faith's ankle. She smiled down at him. "He's attached to me." Michael huffed a soft laugh. "He is. Completely. He hasn't bonded with anyone like this since—" His voice faltered. He swallowed. Faith didn't push or probe. She simply said, "You loved her very much." Michael nodded slowly. "More than myself. More than anything." Faith's expression softened with a tenderness that wasn't pity, just recognition of grief she had carried in her own ways. "How long has it been?" she asked. 2 years, he answered quietly. "And I still wake up expecting her to walk into the room and laugh at my terrible attempts at making coffee." Faith's hand gently brushed the floor, close to his but not touching, a gesture of presence. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Michael let out a breath he'd held for months, years maybe. "Everyone keeps saying that, but when you say it, it doesn't hurt. It feels like you mean it." Faith blinked back the emotion that filled her eyes. "Because I do." Michael looked at her, really looked, and for the first time he noticed the faint shadows under her eyes, the way she carried exhaustion quietly, gracefully, without letting it turn into bitterness. He saw her strength, not just her gentleness. "You're remarkable," he said again, voice thick. Faith shook her head, flustered. "Please don't say things like that, sir." "Why not?" "Because they sound like things people say when they want something from you." Michael's expression softened, pain flickering in his gaze. "I don't want anything from you." Faith swallowed. "Then why say it?" Michael shifted toward her, just slightly, his voice low. "Because it's true." Her breath caught, her lips parted, her eyes softened with a shy disbelief that made his heart twist. But before either of them could say another word, Rusty lifted his head and let out a soft bark, a weak one, but unmistakably playful. Faith gasped. "Was that?" Michael's eyes widened. "He hasn't barked in months." Faith leaned close to the dog, her hand resting under his chin. "Hey, sweetheart, are you talking to us?" Rusty barked again, a tiny huff of sound followed by an attempted wag of his tail. Faith's face lit with a joy Michael hadn't seen from anyone since his wife died. "Oh my goodness, Michael, he's happy." Michael froze at the sound of his name on her lips. Warm, unplanned, natural. Faith clamped a hand over her mouth, mortified. I'm so sorry, sir, I didn't mean." "No," he said quickly, gently. "Say it again." Faith blinked at him, wide-eyed. "Michael?" Something melted in his chest, something he'd believed was dead, something that stirred like a seed breaking open toward sunlight. Rusty barked once more as if approving this shift in the air. Michael reached out and placed his hand next to Faith's on Rusty's back. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away. "Faith," he whispered, "I don't know how you walked into this house and brought life back into it. Into him." His voice trembled. "Into me." Faith stared at him, breath unsteady, eyes soft and shining. "You were never broken," she whispered. "You were just hurting." Michael swallowed the knot in his throat. "And you make it hurt less." Faith's eyes dropped, shy and overwhelmed, but her hand remained beside his, their fingers touching lightly, intentionally now. Rusty nudged their joined hands with his nose, old, tired, wise, urging them closer together. Faith let out a soft laugh that trembled like hope. Michael smiled, full, genuine, unguarded. In the coldest room of the mansion, surrounded by loss and healing and one old dog who refused to give up, something warm bloomed, something new, something that felt like a second chance neither of them had dared to imagine. And for the first time in years, the house no longer felt haunted. It felt alive. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful,